Buenos días a todos los presentes.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on electric mobility. My name is Fernando Nasha, and I am presenting UNEP. It is my pleasure to give you the welcome to this webinar on lessons learned on the sustainable mobility projects and next challenges. Today we have Ignacio Rivas.
This meeting is being recorded.
The sustainability chief in the Sustainability Agency of Electricity. He is an electrical engineer from the Chile University. He has a magister in economics and policy of energy and the environment from the University College of London. He has more than 13 years experience in the energy field, specialized in the implementation of low carbon initiatives, and has a main role in the coordination of electrical mobility in the Chilean Electrical Mobility Agency. Today, Ignacio is going to present his experience and all the lessons learned in terms of mobility of the agency that have been implemented in Chile. And we're also going to discuss how these initiatives are reducing the impact of the transportation industry and generating social and economical benefits for the country. We're also going to address challenges right now and in the future that affect Chile and other regions like Latin America and the Caribbean. Today, we're going to have an initial presentation by Ignacio, followed by a Q&A session. So we invite you here to participate, and you can send your questions through the chat. Without any further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Ignacio so that he can tell us about his presentation. Good morning. Yes, good morning. Thank you for presenting me. And I also want to thank everyone watching live today and who will also watch us later. I want to check if you're seeing my screen. Yes, we can see you great. Okay, so like Fernando was saying, I'm going to be talking to you about the lessons learned and the upcoming challenges in sustainable mobility projects. This from the point of view that we have as an sustainable energy agency. This is a public-private agency that was created by a law decree in the Energy Ministry of Chile. We have the end of coordinating public-private initiatives in terms of sustainable energy. And I am the chief of green hydrogen and electric mobility. Why is it important, our role at the agency? Well, because you will understand our perspective and our experience in these projects. So the easiest way to explain the agency for you is this metaphor, that we are the arm that implements the initiatives of the Energy Ministry. The ministry publishes public policies, and through our work, we implement in projects and initiatives the policies. This is the very concrete experience of the implementation of our agency. A little bit of context before we go into the lessons learned and upcoming challenges. We have a similar situation in a lot of countries in the world. Around 37% of all consumption is dedicated to transportation. And as you may imagine, a large part of this energy is produced by fossil fuels. And in the case of Chile, they are mainly imported. So Chile needs to become independent from the need of fossil fuels that come from other countries. So having energy matrixes and electrical generation in a sustainable and independent manner also lead to energy independence. If we also realize how transportation impacts in terms of greenhouse emissions, then 24% of all emissions produced in Chile come from this transportation sector. And this is important because as Chile and other countries in the world, as we are closing in the COP28, we will also mention that it's important to decarbonize our societies and the economies with different goals. Some seek to be carbon neutral for 2050, others have other goals. But if we're going to meet any of these goals, we need to decarbonize the transportation sector. And we will also need to concern ourselves with this matter. 3 governments ago in Chile, we developed this electromobility strategy that sets ambitious goals. But in a nutshell, we aim to, in the main terrestrial vehicles, to only incorporate zero emissions vehicle from 2035 onwards. So we won't need any vehicles fueled by fossil fuels. But I would like to give a bit more context because we are focusing on the technological side, but I wanted to zoom out first so that we can also see a context beyond technology and certain initiatives in electric mobility currently nowadays. So our aim is to decarbonize the economy, and for that we need a low carbon mobility. But for that, we have different initiatives, and implementing technology is probably the last one. We want to first avoid traveling. For example, all of us today are avoiding travel. If Fernando had invited us all to go by plane to this talk, then that would have added a lot of emissions. So by using webinars, we're avoiding travel. But could we not avoid it? I'm not going to give this webinar's example, but if we have to go to a meeting within the same city, instead of going in our own vehicles, we could instead use other transportation alternatives that may be more sustainable, such as walking or going by bike or public transportation. And if we must go with our own vehicles, then we should choose low emission vehicles. Why am I saying this? Because we're going to be focusing in these technologies and low emission vehicles, but really all of these are not good per se, because if we only focus in electric mobility, but yet we double these vehicles, and people are going to stop walking or using their bikes, then that's not going to be great news. So low emission technology is great, but they should be used to avoid using combustion vehicles and not as an alternative as a whole. Before I start talking about our work in the agency, I want to show you how we address them, especially electromobility projects. Electromobility is understood as a system that is the vehicle focused, but there's a lot of enabling conditions besides the vehicle so that they can work properly. For example, for an electric vehicle to work, we need to have waste policies of what we're going to do with the vehicle's batteries, and someday will need to be replaced. We need to focus in access to financing, in boosting the vehicle industry, in training technicians, and also educating citizenship. So within all our work in the agency, we need to strengthen these enabling conditions. We don't only work with vehicles, we work around all these enabling conditions. And maybe you heard this metaphor, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And we're focusing in cargo infrastructure in this metaphor, but then I'm going to extend this metaphor to other enabling conditions. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, both are important. And we need to have progress in both, okay, in electric vehicles and in refueling equipment. But this has a footnote. Electric vehicles take months to go into circulation once we choose to purchase them. But for refueling equipment, it takes years, not months. So it has to be planned a bit earlier than vehicles. We need to advance in this before. And this can also be addressed in terms of all enabling conditions, in terms of upkeeping, preparing the electric grid. So that's why I like to talk about this enabling condition context. You see just the vehicle and the map of Chile, okay? We have a great extension from north to south with Santiago in the center, and where 40% of the population lives. We have to also think about how reaching other regions with this complete ecosystem. The enabling conditions have to be generated a bit before vehicles. And I'm going to move on now with certain success cases in the agency. And these success cases with a lot of learning, work, things that didn't go as planned, led to the lessons learned. Because for those hearing, probably the most interesting part is, okay, that's a great idea, but what went wrong? And what can we learn from that so that it gets better in the future? So the first project was Mi Taxi Eléctrico, my electrical taxi. It seeks to accelerate the adoption of electromobility in minor transportation. With this model that I'm telling you of the vehicle and enabling conditions, with this project, we seek to strengthen the ecosystem of local electromobility with refueling stations, electric workshops, specialized installers. So this project seeks to bring the vehicle and the enabling conditions forward so that we can then incorporate outside the scope of this project, boost the creation of electric vehicles, because we will already have the enabling conditions base. We have 4 axes of work. We co-finance taxis and other types of private vehicles. We gave them around 14,000 and 19,000 American dollars. And that co-financing varied in the vehicle's autonomy. The higher the autonomy, the larger the financing. So what makes the vehicle expensive? It's its battery. So that's what we seek to solve. Give more financing to those who look for more autonomous batteries. Because taxis go around a lot, right? So it's necessary that their battery will be proper for the type of operations of a taxi. We also seek to implement refueling of about 7 kilowatts in the home of the taxi driver. We finance these refueling stations totally. So it's key because they don't depend in the electric grid they can get home at night and just plug in their vehicle to the electric grid and use it for cheaper prices. Also, we give technical support to taxi drivers so that they can take the right decisions. We will consult with them in terms of what is the best model and brand for them. And also as an agency, we select what are the providers that are most competitive. And also, we ensure that they do a great job. So, for example, that the refueling station is properly installed in the home of the taxi driver. We had a first version of 50 taxis in Santiago. Now we are in a second version that are about 90 taxis. We already reached 72, and I think we're going to reach our goal. And we could also reach other regions outside of Santiago. So this gives a more democratic access to electric mobility. Because first, we need to generate these ecosystems. And then we will have a third version. We are waiting for confirmation. Public funds are hard, so we're working towards getting approval. And it's about 170 taxis, and it's going to be only outside of Santiago. So we're going to boost the scale in terms of number of taxis, but also in terms of territory. And you may be wondering why we're going towards the third version, because the first two versions were assessed as successful. So they're giving us more resources each time, so we can upscale this program. And the results are that we have electric taxis in the street and also refueling stations in their homes. But there's also a lot of indirect results that maybe are harder to see, but yet important. For example, it makes more likely that taxis are electric because we have the enabling conditions. Even if we stop this program now, a taxi driver without financing may be more accessible to buy a type of electric vehicle. It also makes higher incentive for electric vehicles because there's a lot of more importers willing to bring vehicles to Chile, especially vehicles with more than 2,200 kilometers of autonomy, which are very demanding. And even manufacturing producers may not be familiar with these autonomy levels. Also, by having more electric vehicles in the streets, we strengthen the enabling conditions and generate further demand. And because we have a lot more cars and refueling stations, we get people to gain knowledge on this subject. There's more demand. People seek to go use public refueling stations. The providers perfect the way of installing these types of infrastructure. When you have more vehicles, you also have more after-sales services. So an indirect result is how this program generates more enabling conditions and develops the ecosystem. And this really raises awareness with the public, technicians, academia, and the citizenship, because they see electromobility in a more close-up manner. Another program was the one of speedy charge, carga rápida. It is defined in continuous current over 50 kilowatts, but we are installing usually chargers that go over the 100 kilowatts, but that was our minimum. We want to be competitive in bids, and those who offered the best bids, we negotiated our co-financing. And also what we sought through this bidding process was to align the deployment of the public sector with public policy objectives. And so we added demands in our bidding processes, some rulings or some laws that have not been passed yet, but we want to incorporate them before. So we want the private sector to invest in initiatives that they didn't invest yet, because mainly they thought that it was a project for the future, not for right now. And with our co-financing, we achieved that they could invest and advanced electric mobility in the region. We, of course, also oversaw the process of subcontractors. This project is being implemented with the GIC and the GES. And we are implemented 17 regions in Chile. And thanks to this program, all regions in Chile are going to have at least 2 refueling stations. Until now, 6 regions in Chile didn't have one. So you can imagine how complex that was. Our government wanted to have more electric mobility cars, but we didn't have any refueling stations. In this public-private collaboration that didn't only involve financing, we also had matters in terms of design, planning. We worked with a lot of other agencies. We gave them about 35% of the investment cost, and the private sector gave about 65%. And this resulted in the enabling conditions so that electric mobility can reach all regions. And the infrastructure is necessary to have electromobility. That is, without public access refueling stations, we cannot have electrical mobility. So it's necessary to have these initiatives and also to advance them. And finally, I want to present the GEF-7 project that addresses electromobility from different axes, more similar with the graph in the beginning that had a circle with the vehicle in the center and around it all the enabling conditions. And these have initiatives in 3 cities outside of Santiago. And what we're going to launch first is a pilot project with 30 taxis, cars, 10 cars per city. And although it's a lower number of cars than in My Taxi Eléctrico, is because we are assessing other focuses. In MITAX Eléctrico, we have 3 bidding processes, one of refueling stations, another one for electric vehicles, and another for taxi drivers. So it's a program with a lot of certainties, but also with a lot of parallel processes to give taxi drivers more certainty, but that becomes more cumbersome. And with this type of project, we will only receive a taxi driver application, and the taxi driver will have its own providers and its own suggestions. So we will see in the future if the MITAX Eléctrico program is best, or if we should incorporate some aspects of this current program, the GF7. So this is how we work in the agency. We make pilot projects, we test what works best, and that allows us to generate, the lessons learned, as we said in the title of the presentation. With this project, we also train electric installers. We also train emergency services. For example, how can firefighters intervene when there's an emergency with an electric vehicle that has other considerations? For example, you are intervening in a high voltage environment, which is an added risk. And also another variable is that electric battery may overheat and then blow up. So that's something they have to take into account. And we're also trying to train women so that we get more women involved in electromobility and make it more likely to join the workforce, which is a field that is mainly male-dominated. Furthermore, we are working in studies that will be nourishing for public policies, for example, in recycling and second life for lithium batteries. And this will lead to an update in a statute in Chile to manage waste of lithium batteries. We are also seeing financing models for electric taxis. So how can we move forward? Today, we're giving funds through our programs, but at some point, we won't be able to fund everyone. So we're trying to see how we can design future financing models that will accelerate electric mobility, but also access public funds or, for example, international funds. And finally, we're working in a study about the cost benefit of electromobility in the power grid. So how to convert the net cost to net benefit. If we make the most of the technology of smart charge, electric mobility can end up being a benefit for the power grid, not only in Chile, but there is also experiences in other countries in the world. So with this project, we are working on electrical mobility from different points of view. So we oversaw these 3 success cases. There's a lot more, but I can't present them because we don't have enough time. But I do want to give you a summary of all the lessons learned. The first is that developing electromobility requires not only having more vehicles, but also more enabling conditions. This is what I said throughout the presentation. Also, the implementation of electrical mobility projects require a lot of efforts in terms of coordination and awareness for stakeholders. So when you design these projects, you have to consider costs and deadlines. So we learned that when we design this project, we have to strengthen our interaction with stakeholders. Because of course, the main difficulties are not with technology. The main difficulty is people. So all of you who want to design projects, please pay a lot of attention to measure the effort of coordination and awareness for stakeholders. Also, because there's a new technology and we work with users who are taxi drivers that have been working for a long time and know the normal vehicles and have to change the whole paradigm by changing to electric vehicles. What we do is take a lot of time in addressing their doubts, their fears, and making them gain trust. It pays in the future. The main complexity of charge infrastructure is in the connection to the power grid through the distributing company. So that will be hard. And at the end, we will show some reports we published in the agency with more information. So the distribution company has to be a focus for you. And also, pilot projects are fundamental to give feedback between public policies and statutes. Through our project, we gather information on what's working and what's not in terms of statutes. We then generate reports and hand them in to the public agencies that generate laws and policies, so they can also improve their fiscalization. And lastly, electromobility works great for the taxi segment. And I am highlighting this. It worked great. And generally, taxi drivers are very happy to be part of our projects and have a great perception. But it takes time. At first, you will face a lot of doubts. They will complain about the tires. Not usually on the battery itself of the vehicle, but they complain of other little things. And over time, they lose that mistrust and they gain confidence. So those problems fix themselves through that connection. Also by working with providers and agencies. Finally, I think it's important to think that these taxi drivers or users have become accustomed during decades to go charge their vehicles in the service station. And once they change and they go home and just plug in their vehicle, it's a lot more comfortable. So another thing that satisfied me, I am an electrical engineer, so I love talking about kilowatts and potency. But I also took great interest by seeing taxi drivers talk about the same subject and how they acquired all this knowledge because they are now part of their field. So finally, to close this presentation, and so we can have a Q&A session, I want to present the challenges, but in a positive way, because they are opportunities for innovation. the main challenge, and perhaps you're a bit tired on me talking about enabling conditions, but that is the main challenge. How can we generate them a bit earlier than vehicles? And how can we do this in all the territory, not just Santiago? We have to reach a very vertical territory, and our extremes are a bit hard to reach. And if I presented a lot of challenges, I thought it would be confusing, so I just selected the main ones. One of the main challenges is that buying an electric vehicle is a lot more expensive than buying a normal vehicle. But we have noticed that there has been a considerable price reduction, and also the price of batteries worldwide. There's a report that presents how the prices of batteries will lower. So at some point, electric vehicles and internal combustion vehicles will cost about the same. But let me tell you that although buying the electric vehicle is more expensive, if you're going to travel a lot and you make a life cycle analysis, the electric vehicle is cheaper in the long term when you take into account all the operational expenses. The second challenge is the access to financing, because I may have a profitable project, but I need someone to fund it. And the institutions are sometimes doubtful on these new technologies. And you have to reach out so that we can access to this type of financing for electric mobility projects. Another is that people will also feel like there's a need for refueling stations. So how can we boost it? And how can we also raise awareness so that the users don't feel that you don't need infinite chargers? You should prioritize charging at home and use the public access filling stations just when you need them. Also, in terms of availability and operation, the public access filling stations have about 20% of downtime. This morning, I was seeing a Wall Street Journal video that shared a case in California where there was about a 30% downtime. So it's important to generate business cases and models where chargers can be in service most of the time. And in the video I saw this morning, in the case of Tesla, their availability levels were higher than competitors. So we should analyze what they're doing. And some of the things they said was that the charging system was a bit more simple. So they owned both the electric vehicles and the charging stations. But in the case of public access charging stations, they have to work with a lot of different vehicles and brands. So it's a challenge, but not only in Chile, but in other countries as well. Another challenge is interoperability. How to make it that for users it's the same to go to charge to provider A or B. A good initiative is to have standardized norms like the ones we have in Chile. Also, we have to accelerate implementation deadlines. Nowadays, we have to wait a really long time for infrastructure to be installed. So we have to see how we can accelerate these times. The fifth challenge is the implementation of infrastructure in buildings. So in the case of taxi drivers, we install them in their homes. But it's a lot harder to install a charging station in an apartment building than in a personal house. And finally, in the GF7 project, we have the challenge of integrating to the power grid these vehicles by leveraging their benefits. And finally, as this is a starting market, at least in the Chilean case, in China, about 35% of vehicles sold are electric. I think in Europe, it's about 20%. In Norway, it's about 90% or more. But we're still in our first stages. 1% of the vehicles sold are electrical. So we don't have as much supply in terms of models, and we have few available units. But I have to tell you that the current scenario is a lot different than the one a year ago. So I think it's going to get better. And the other problem is the lack of awareness. People don't know how to ask. They have to ask about connections, about how to charge them. People who sell electric vehicles also have a lack of information because they sell both vehicles, electric and internal combustion vehicles. And because they know more about the latter, they usually lead buyers to buy this type of vehicles that they know best. And finally, the financing sector. Usually ask a lot of us at the agency about degradation, about the useful life of batteries, because as they finance assets that may fail, it's an uncertainty. So there's also a lack of awareness in the financing sector. And we have to show them that electric vehicles are reliable. They are not as risky as they may think. But the main challenge in Chile, as well as in other countries in Latin America, is that we have to move from less than 1% of vehicles sold in low emissions. And in less than a decade, we have to achieve 100% of low emission vehicles sold. It's a huge challenge from 0 to 100. And we have to think how we will carry this out in a decade. And we're working with the transportation and the electric ministries to work on this challenge. And I swear I'm about to finish now. I showed you the difficult challenges, but electromobility is advancing in a lot of regions. Like I said, for example, Europe, China, Norway. In Norway, about 90% of the vehicles sold are electric. These are challenges that exist, but have been solved by other societies. So countries that are a bit further behind, such as us in this presentation, unless there's a person from Norway around, what we need to do is to cooperate and to share knowledge to see how we can make progress faster. So my request to you is to contact Fernando and the UNEP so that we can share knowledge. And the last slide, we have the webpage ecomovilidad.cl, where we publish different reports and lessons learned from our projects. And that's information that is just a click away. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm very grateful that you listened. I hope I didn't go over my time and that we can receive a few questions. Thank you, Ignacio. Yes, I want to congratulate you and the agency for all the work. I think it's been very enlightening what you said and how you can also work with public policies and work with it to reduce emissions in the country. And also talk with other sectors like the transportation sector. So it's a great example. And sometimes we forget about the connection of the public policies and electric mobility. So, and that causes implementation to be delayed. So I think your presentation was great so that other countries can take the Chilean experience as reference. So we'll try to cover as many questions as possible. We have a lot in terms of the Mi Taxi Eléctrico project. The first is about the disparity in development in Chile. How they affected the challenges and the enabling conditions, and how did you address these disparities? Okay, yes, disparity was something that affected us. For example, in the second version of Mi Taxi Eléctrico, we had 6 regions, and we had the request that providers had to cover at least 3 of these regions, and no one submitted a request. So talking with the providers, they told us, I can't address 3 regions, so I'm not submitting any region at all. And when I talked to them and said, okay, you can submit just 1 region, they all submitted for Santiago. But with all this knowledge, we generated opportunities for other regions, and nowadays we have covered them all. So we were affected by disparities, and we realized that maybe being too demanding for at least 3 regions was gridlock. So sometimes you need to address it more gradually. Great. And about the same program, what mistakes were made? And when reaching out to the union, what were the challenges? Because sometimes unions don't want to work with the governments in countries. Well, we didn't face a lot of problems. In Chile, I don't think we could compare with other countries, but we have a union with 2 associations. So they cover the same regions. And these 2 associations, instead of being just one, work independently. So you have a disparity because you have to talk with 2 different unions. But at the same time, a lot of taxi drivers are not unionized. So we didn't have a problem with the unions. They collaborated with us and helped us reach their members. But we also discovered that the taxi universe is a lot larger than what unions cover. Having said that, they were huge stakeholders, and I think we should actually thank them because they collaborated more than they created problems. But it's fundamental to meet them, get together, ask them what they think about the program, if they see any improvement opportunities, and not just with unions, with taxi drivers and people in the field. You have to involve them. But fortunately, we didn't face a lot of challenges in that regard. Yes, so you say that we should create associations and partnerships and show them that working with the government will enable these types of programs. Yes, but that would be a footnote. In the case of Chile, we participated with unions, but also with independent taxi drivers. Okay, great. Another question is in terms of the local market characteristics. What do you think was key to develop electric mobility? Well, I think the main thing was interest from brands to bring e-vehicles to Chile. That really helped us because what could have happened? Sellers of vehicles could have refused, or maybe they wouldn't have wanted to bring their vehicles to Chile. So it was key that the Union of Vehicle Suppliers supported us in this program. They helped us reach their associates, but also when we had meetings, they involved people so that they could open doors to the largest possible amount of providers or suppliers. So that was a key characteristic. Another was that nowadays there's companies in Chile that are willing to invest in public refilling stations further than the current demand for e-vehicles. So we have partners and suppliers that helped us implement this charge infrastructure. I thought those were the main characteristics. Another characteristics that I don't know if they make the situation more complex, but the type of connectors in electric vehicles in Latin America is complex. Because in Europe, there's a European standard. In China, there's a Chinese standard. In Japan, same thing. In North America, you have North American standards. But in Latin America, we receive vehicles from all over the world. So that has been a characteristic that made things difficult for the Chilean market. And although we are leaning towards the European standards, there's still a lot of vehicles with the Chinese and Japanese standards. So that was complex when compared to other more developed countries. And it will also be a challenge to create roadmaps for Latin American vehicles, because in Argentina, if they use a different standard than in Chile, people who cross the border will face a lot of issues. But at least in the Cono Sur, we are leaning over to the European standard. But, you know, it can be complicated. And lastly, I'm sorry if I'm going a bit over the question, but also the type of vehicle the taxi type vehicle isn't that accessible in the electric vehicle market because they focus in SUVs. About 50% of electric vehicles are SUVs, and about 30% are sedans, which are the taxi type vehicles. And you need, you know, a lower range sedan. So we didn't have that many different models available to be used as taxis. And another problem is that the price similarity or disparity will be, we will only be reach this price similarity until later. For example, in the United States, the Ford F-50 was the cheaper vehicle. And in Chile, it was a vehicle of about $12,000. So with this price range, the battery makes vehicles more expensive. So if you have, for example, a vehicle that is more expensive, it is proportionately less of an investment to make it electric. The national cars in Chile are cheaper than those in more developed countries. And therefore, it is a lot more expensive proportionally to make them electric. Also in Chile, we pay fewer tariffs for importing. So we can buy vehicles at a cheaper price than in Argentina, for example, or Uruguay. Yes, thank you, Ignacio. Thank you for answering so many of the questions and being so specific. I think it was a great space for sharing knowledge, and it was very enriching. And I want to also thank everyone for being here today. The public sector, the private sector, policymakers that are looking for ways to replicate the success cases of other countries. And on my side, I want to thank you, Ignacio, for sharing your experience. And I hope we can meet again. I hope we can all stay in touch in these electric mobility spaces we're trying to generate. So we're going to end this webinar today, and I hope we stay in touch. Thank you, Ignacio. Yes, and thank you, Fernando, for inviting me. And thank you for organizing this event. And bye, everyone who is watching. Okay, bye.